You're listening to Seattle Real Estate Podcast.
Hey everybody, I'm Sean Reynolds, the owner of Summit Properties Northwest, Reynolds & Klein Appraisal, and your host of this episode of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. So today we are talking about renters and homeowners face a new phase of the coronavirus with evictions and foreclosures looming. We're at that point with the whole coronavirus thing where a lot of the statutes that were set up that were there to mitigate the effects of the economy being shut down, primarily the tenants being evicted and homeowners being foreclosed on. A lot of the statutes that were set up, they are now being retired, meaning we go back to business as usual for both tenants being evicted and homeowners being foreclosed on. So I've got a couple of articles here that I found were pretty informative as far as what's actually really going on and how bad is this situation that the United States could be facing. So let's jump on into it. The first one is from Yahoo Finance. I always find that's a pretty good source for unbiased financial articles. So it starts out with a potential housing crisis is on the way for millions of Americans whose mortgage and rent deferrals about to sunset. Evictions loom as the end of state and local moratoriums will no longer protect homeowners and tenants unable to make payments because of COVID-19 lockdowns. A minority of U.S. states have already expired orders against evictions, and a host of others across the country are set to expire over the next 2 months. Keep in mind that our unemployment rate right now is still 11.1%, I think, and before the coronavirus, I think we were under 3%. Were we right around 3%? But we're looking at literally triple and then some, almost 4 times the unemployment rate we have right now than we did before the coronavirus. Back in February 2020, the economy was just humming along, super low unemployment. Things were going great. And then boom, the hammer got dropped with coronavirus. And so we're still working our way through a lot of these issues. And hopefully homelessness doesn't become a big one. But what we're saying is that there are a lot of homeowners and a lot of tenants who are probably in jeopardy over the next few months and definitely over the next 6 months of having something happen to the roof over their heads. So let's get into it and take a look. So again, a minority of U.S. states have already expired orders against evictions. Once they do, residents are facing a possible flood of non-payment legal actions. The COVID-19 Eviction Defense Project predicted recently that by the end of September, more than 20 million U.S. renters, many of them Black and Latinos located in big cities, will be at risk for eviction. According to data released on Friday by mortgage tracking firm ATTOM Data Solutions, homeowners most at risk for foreclosures during the second quarter were those in metropolitan markets along the East Coast and in northern Illinois, with clusters of troubled borrowers in New York City, Chicago, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. So here on the West Coast, I am not hearing a ton of people talking about either foreclosure or tenants being evicted. I know a handful of property managers, and for the most part, most of their tenants are paying. So a lot of that probably has to do with the economic opportunity here on the West Coast. There's just a lot fewer unemployed people is kind of how I see things. And with the way that the big cities of New York City, Chicago, Baltimore, and Washington, D.C. are set up with their populations, I could see having a massive eviction problem and how difficult it might be for those cities to kind of work their way through this. So there are millions of Americans now unemployed due to the pandemic with greatly reduced means to keep up on their mortgages. Todd Teta, he's the ATTOM's chief product officer. He told Yahoo Finance in an email, at some point, banks are going to need mortgage holders to pay what they owe and go after those who don't, he added. Yeah, I think that's true in any business situation, but the one that we're in right now, so many people, it's not because they did something wrong at their job where they got fired. They literally couldn't go to their job. Their companies were shut down. And now those companies are rocked, and tenants coming back to the workforce, they're trying to figure out which way is up. And unfortunately, The eviction process is just one more thing that they're going to have to deal with. Federally mandated foreclosure moratoriums were granted to homeowners with government-backed loans when the crisis began, but those will begin to expire on August 31st, coming right up, a month and a half. Until then, the CARES Act prohibits lenders and servicers from initiating or finalizing foreclosure proceedings. Borrowers already facing foreclosure before the measure was put into place are in the most imminent jeopardy, while homeowners with FHA-insured mortgages that are in good standing are eligible for up to a year's worth of delayed payment forbearance if COVID-19 impacts their ability to continue payments. So there are still quite a few things, and here in the state of Washington, I think our displacing tenants goes through 2021. It's something crazy like that. There was a 6-month moratorium put on place, and I think there's another 6-month. I can't remember. I've done a couple of podcasts on the whole eviction and mortgage forbearance, and the best thing to do is if you are a tenant, contact your landlord and you're not able to make your payment, work something out. Again, that same thing goes with if you are a homeowner and you're not able to make your mortgage payment, reach out to your mortgage servicer, the one whose name and address information are on your mortgage bill. Reach out to them and say, hey, I'm in a situation where I can't make my mortgage, or if you're talking with your landlord, I am not able to make my rent. They will, for the most part, work with you. And then there are a whole bunch of facilities set up. Just do a quick Google search and you will come up with a handful, if not more, of agencies that are out there to help both homeowners and tenants to remain in their homes. So according to the Mortgage Bankers Association, among 38.2 million U.S. residential mortgage loans representing 76% of the first mortgages and servicing market, about 4.2 million were in forbearance during the week of June 22nd to June 28th. So that's a lot. 4.2 million homeowners are in forbearance. And that's just for first mortgage servicing. The number represents all mortgages in the data set that were in forbearance, regardless of whether they were FHA insured and obtained under the CARES Act. Non-FHA insured borrowers have no federal rights to halt payments based on COVID-19 related financial hardship. However, the Mortgage Bankers Association Director of Public Affairs, ATTOM Data told Yahoo Finance that most lenders are offering similar protections to those with private loans. So across the board, most lenders realize that it is better to work with a homeowner than it is to foreclose on them, because we found out how expensive that was in the Great Recession of 2008, with banks taking back all these properties, and then they're like, oh my gosh, these assets are dropping in value incredibly. We don't really want these on our books. And it took them years and years and years for these banks to get these properties off their books. All right. Meanwhile, some states like Delaware have stepped in with even more aggressive measures than the federal governments. The state's governor signed an order extending foreclosure moratoriums so long as the state of emergency remains in effect. So long as we are in a pandemic, then I think you're going to see a lot of these measures still stay in place. And you need to figure out for your own state and your own jurisdiction and your own city kind of exactly what those are. For renters, a handful of state and local orders that outlawed evictions against tenants facing COVID-19 hardship have already expired. Idaho, Iowa, and Alabama are among a clutch of states that have allowed evictions to resume. Now, Idaho, Iowa, and Alabama, I believe, do not have enormous COVID impact. I could be wrong there, but I know Idaho did not. Iowa, I don't think, and Alabama, I am not sure on. Some states, including Arkansas and Georgia, with the exception of Atlanta, never adopted tenant protections, which places like Denver and Massachusetts, they placed an indefinite ban on evictions. That makes it really difficult on a homeowner if they've got tenants in there and you've got an indefinite ban on an eviction. Well, a federal moratorium that protects tenants from eviction from FHA-secured properties expires July 25th. So we're kind of right in that time period where the stuff expiring. Yeah, we're coming out of the whole coronavirus thing, but then we've got all these cases going on. There's just a lot of confusion in all the markets, the home ownership, forbearance, tenant law. what's going on. And that's what a lot of people are worried about is, oh my gosh, if we don't get some more stimulus money out there, or we don't address these evictions, we could have a ton of people living on the streets. And beyond that July 25th date, landlords must give tenants 30 days notice before requiring them to vacate the property, making August 25th the key date on which vulnerable Americans could lose their homes. Aside from that federal guideline, tenants of FHA and non-FHA secured properties can consult their state and local rules, which vary widely concerning additional time to defer lease payments. So that's why you kind of want to check in with your individual lender and kind of figure out, hey, what do you have going on, or your individual landlord. All right, so we're going to wrap up that article, but the main thing is, on a lot of these forbearances, once those forbearance periods are ending and people can't bring all the money back that they need to bring their loans current, I think you could see some pretty drastic increases in the number of foreclosures out there. All right, so let's jump into looming evictions may soon make 28 million people homeless in the U.S. That's per an expert. All right, and these are the key points, and this is a CNBC article. The key points here are the coronavirus pandemic could result in some 28 million Americans being evicted. That's a lot of people. So the American population right now, I think, is 328.1 million. So what is that? 28 million, that 8%? Somewhere in there? 8% of Americans, almost 1 out of 10 Americans could be evicted due to the coronavirus. By comparison, 10 million people lost their homes in the Great Recession. Now keep in mind, the Great Recession was basically based off of real estate. We had these crazy loans going on that we shouldn't have had floating around there. People got in way over their head. There was too much supply, and then prices started dropping, and it was a free fall of values that just dropped, just went crazy down. So here's what we can expect from this crisis. Emily Bemfer began her career representing homeless families in Washington, D.C. She represents a lot of homeless, and she's a leading expert on evictions. She's the chair of the American Bars Association Task Force Committee on Eviction and co-creator of the COVID-19 Housing Policy Scorecard with the Eviction Lab at Princeton University. So CNBC asked this expert, you've been keeping track of what states are doing to protect tenants, mostly through eviction moratoriums. How do you feel the efforts have fallen short? Some of the moratoriums are limited to different segments of the population and in their duration. This is her response. They're also not coupled with financial assistance to ensure that renters don't accrue this backed up debt and are stabilized enough to stay in their unit. So we've got this big issue of all these programs basically allowing people to stay in place, but what about long term when they're coming out of a situation where they don't have a job and they need to come up with a lump sum payment of money? That's going to be very difficult for most of these people to overcome, especially people in the lower income brackets where they can't create $4, $5, $6 grand overnight to make up for 2, 3, 4 months of lost rent. Another issue is that some states' landlords were allowed to go forward with a hearing on eviction and even receive an order of eviction, and it was only forestalled at the execution stage. So what she's saying is that there's a whole bunch of eviction process lined up, teed up, ready to go, and the minute that the regulations are taken off of the moratorium, once the moratoriums are lifted, we're going to see some evictions and some homelessness take place. That means that there are a number of evictions that are just waiting for the sheriffs to execute. The moment of the moratorium lift, all of those families will be immediately put out. And right now, 29 states lack any state-level moratorium against evictions. So that's the reason I'm bringing up this whole podcast concept, is that I think there are a ton of people out there who are at risk, and we needed to kind of take a look and see, is this a segment of the population that we need to have, I don't know, is it another round of stimulus checks with potentially looking directly at homeownership and directly at tenant eviction? I don't know. I know some of that's been talked about, but it's such a big issue that I think it's really difficult to come up with a solid game plan that applies to everybody, that everybody can take advantage of. But I think just knowing that this is happening out there is kind of that first step, right, in recognizing, okay, there's a problem, what do we do about it? So here's CNBC asked, because of the pandemic, a lot of these evictions are unfolding over video or phone instead of in the courtroom. The courtrooms have been closed down. What are the issues that come up here? Her response was, even prior to the pandemic, the system was very challenging for tenants to navigate and to raise their rights. 90% of tenants across the country are underrepresented. When you consider that people are now choosing between rent and food for their families, they're also unable to pay for minutes on their phone or Wi-Fi to log into a remote hearing. So appearance itself may be very challenging. Appearance at a hearing may be very challenging. And if they fail to appear, and if they weren't able to dial in, or if they don't have the right link to the Zoom, that's considered a failure to appear, which results in a default judgment for the property owner. All right, so let's stop for just a second and let's kind of take a look at, I think a lot of people have in their mind that homeowners who are maybe renting out their home to tenants, they are the absolute rich ones. They are landowners and they have all this money, and that is not necessarily true. A ton of rental property owners might have one rental property, and they may be living paycheck to paycheck as well, but they've figured out a way to come up with a down payment for that rental property. Maybe they do a line of credit and they buy their primary residence they're living in now. But these homeowners who are renting their homes out, they don't have enormous piles of cash sitting around, and they still have a mortgage to make. So if you as the tenant are not making the mortgage, they may be placed under some significant stress as well. They might be in the case of having their home foreclosed on, even if it is their rental property. That is a big, very big reality. That is a reality I think you don't see a lot pointed out, because our media is so skewed to the tenant side of things. Let's underrepresent the little guy. You see that. But I work with a lot of homeowners who are landlords, who are fledgling landlords, meaning maybe they've got one rental property and they want to do another one, because that is kind of the American dream, is to build up enough rental property that's appreciating, on top of the fact that you've got cash flow if you're in a market where you can put a big enough down payment, or if you've had enough appreciation over time with your rents that they more than cover your principal and interest payment, and you're actually making some money. Wouldn't that be a novel concept? Here in the Seattle market, unless you have a massive down payment, none of your properties are going to cash flow. Rent just doesn't cover what the mortgage is based on acquisition cost. Just doesn't happen. And you'll see that in a lot of major cities, in New York and California, all over California, you'll see that. And in more expensive in areas, that's the case. So you've got a lot of landlords out there who are being impacted by this as well, that maybe can't get a mortgage forbearance for whatever reason, or they're just trying to hold things together and they need your rent. So this is a problem not only with tenants, but also with the smaller landlords as well. So what can be done? CNBC asks, what can be done to make this eviction crisis less devastating? And she answers, as an immediate measure, we need a nationwide uniform moratorium on eviction, and it has to be coupled with financial assistance to ensure that the renter can stay housed without shifting the debt burden onto the property owner. That is the crux of the issue, is keeping a roof over people's heads, but not shifting the debt burden onto the property owner. The owners that are the most likely to be affected by the eviction crisis right now are those who have small properties and don't have the financial cushion to make ends meet over a period of months when they're not receiving that rent. Their mortgages still come due. And that's been the big kicker throughout all this. I mean, we just all kind of know it, is when people are out of work, they don't have the ability to make those payments. They have to prioritize keeping a roof over their head if they can, and then food, and kind of down on the food chain, down along the priority line of what they have to pay out. And so once that's in place, that is the nationwide uniform moratorium. Once that's in place, we really need to start addressing the root causes of the eviction crisis and the lack of affordable housing. That to me is kind of a much deeper issue. And I think we know the root causes of the eviction crisis right now are people are without work. There's been a massive shift in the way that businesses are operating. There's a lot of jobs that have been lost. There's a lot of jobs that probably aren't coming back to the workplace. And that's kind of the restructuring of how America is doing business right now. And like the previous article I raised, I think you're going to see a lot of people in the big inner cities, in the big urban cities like Washington, D.C., like New York City, like Chicago. Those are areas that I think we need to place a lot of focus on, because those are the areas most at risk according to these statistics. And it makes sense. Those are some populations with some pretty heavy lower income segments of society, and those are the people that are going to be most at risk, because they're not going to have jobs, and they're not going to have a job to go back to down the road when things actually do open up. And so we need to take a hard look at that and see what solutions we can come up with. I don't have any major solutions right now. I'm kind of basically like, I don't really know what to do here either. But I think being aware of these situations and having an idea that they are out here, because here on the West Coast, here in Seattle, we're not seeing these kind of levels that you would think. When I first read this article, 28 million tenants being evicted, that seems incredible. But then when you start running the numbers and you start looking at the percentage of population that's unemployed, okay, when you have these moratoriums lifted, that could be a very real possibility of that happening. I hope it doesn't, and I hope these people don't have to go homeless out in the streets. But yeah, that might be a very big reality. And so we're going to have some governmental measure step in and kind of prop up this end of the market as well. And I don't really know what that looks like, but I will keep you apprised of this situation as it happens. So thank you so much for tuning in to another segment of the Seattle Real Estate Podcast. If you're enjoying this content either on YouTube or the podcast platforms, love to have you subscribe to our YouTube channel, and thank you for downloading on and subscribing on the podcast networks as well. So again, I am Sean Reynolds from Summit Properties Northwest, Reynolds & Klein Appraisal. Thank you so much for tuning in. And right now, I am doing 2 podcasts a day. We're going to try double the podcasting because there's so much content out there. I'm not getting to a lot of it. I'm going to try and play catch up, do a couple of podcasts a day. We'll see where it goes. So again, thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate it. I will catch you on the next one. Bye for now. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you'll know when our next video is out.